The alien ambassador's skull fragmented as John Morales' armored fist slammed into his face, purple blood spattering the stunned Galactic Council. No one moved to stop the enraged human. "That's what happens when you piss off humanity," Morales snarled, glaring around the silent chamber. "The Zorgons conquered your world, Ambassador Quasar, enslaved your people. Rest assured, we'll handle them." "Impossible," the Centaurian delegate scoffed. "The Zorgons' physiology makes them immune to all weapons. If the technologically advanced Iconians fell so easily, what chance do you primitives have? Your feeble human toys are no match for—" Morales kicked the Iconian's body off the dais. "It's not about who has the fanciest tech. It's about having the guts to act. And now you'll see what happens when humans get angry." He looked at Quasar. "Come with me." Outside, Quasar grabbed his arm. "How can you defeat the Zorgons? My people couldn't even—" "Your people aren't human." Morales' grin was fierce. "Let me introduce you to Task Force Retribution." He led Quasar into a human warship's armory. Soldiers looked up from gleaming rifles, eyes blazing with eagerness. "These are the most dangerous beings in the galaxy, Ambassador. Zorgons may be immune to your weapons, not to ours, and not to our anger." Morales picked up a strange gun, smiling coldly. "It's time we show them what it means to be human." The human warship streaked through the swirling blue vortex of hyperspace, hurtling towards its destination. In the briefing room, Morales gathered his men around the central holotable. "Listen up," Morales barked, pulling up a floating schematic with a flick of his hand. A rotating image of a Zorgon shimmered above the projector. Zorgon hide secretes an enzyme that disintegrates normal plasma bolts and laser blasts. It's why the Iconians' weapons were useless against them. Hernandez, Morales' right-hand man, stepped forward. He pointed to a network of luminous tubes running beneath the projected creature's skin. But our tech boys whipped up a solution. Hernandez hefted a sleek rifle, its barrel still glowing a faint orange. Magnetized rails accelerate a plasma-sheathed tungsten dart to Mach 7. Punches clean through the bastard's skin to rupture those subdermal arteries. Should drop 'em quick. "Fuck yeah," Kowalski crowed, pumping a fist. "Let's see them shrug off depleted uranium." The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. Iconia hung before them, a blue-gray orb shrouded in clouds. "All right, can the chatter and gear up?" Morales snapped. "We're going in quiet. Active camo subsonic approach. Move out." Minutes later, two matte black shuttles detached from the warship's flanks and knifed into the planet's atmosphere, vanishing against the twilight sky. They touched down in a forested park on the outskirts of the Iconian capital. The humans filed out, little more than rippling blurs as their chameleon tech suits adapted to the deepening gloom. They double-timed it through eerily empty streets, past abandoned vehicles and shuttered homes. A ghost city. Morales signaled a halt, his hackles rising. Something was wrong. Where were all the civilians? A flicker of movement in his peripheral vision. Morales whirled, active camo disengaging as he sighted down his rifle's barrel. 5 nightmarish figures emerged from a shattered storefront, 8 feet tall, corded with ropey muscle. Faint light played across segmented ebony carapaces slick with mucus. Zorgons. The aliens bellowed, arm blades flaring to life in flashes of searing purple. They charged. Morales centered his sights on the lead creature and squeezed the trigger. The tungsten spike ripped through its skull in a spray of cobalt gore. The beast toppled, instantly dead. Animalistic howls of shock and rage. Return fire sizzled past the humans as they scattered, concrete exploding around them. "Take 'em down!" Morales roared. The squad opened up, rifles bucking. Zorgons fell, thrashing and gurgling as tungsten shredded flesh and bone. Hernandez vaulted a low wall and buried his combat knife to the hilt in a Zorgon's neck, wrenching it free in a geyser of luminous ichor. Abruptly it was over. Ruptured corpses littered the street, limbs still twitching. "Clear," Hernandez called, flicking gore from his blade. Morales kept his rifle up, scanning for threats. Nothing. Kowalski, get me into their system, he ordered. We need to find out where they're keeping the Iconians. The tech specialist pried open a service panel on a nearby building, pulling out a spaghetti tangle of fiber-optic cable. He jacked Quasar's cipher into the bundle. "I'm in," Kowalski reported, his HUD lighting up with cascading data streams. "Got a schematic here. Looks like they've herded the whole population into a detention camp in the Central Park." Morales' face was grim behind his visor as he uploaded the coordinates to the squad. "Then that's our target," he growled. "Let's move out and introduce these slaving fucks to their worst nightmare." The humans pushed deeper into the city, weapons raised. Morales felt bile rising in his throat as the Central Park came into view. Thousands of Iconians were packed behind electrified fences, little more than skin and bones. A dozen hulking Zorgons patrolled the perimeter, plasma cannons cradled in their arms. Morales made a quick hand gesture, deploying Hernandez and half the squad to flank the camp. He zeroed his sights on the nearest guard tower, the Zorgon manning the turret still oblivious to the danger. Morales pulled the trigger. The hypersonic round punched through the alien's skull and exploded out the other side, painting the interior of the tower with luminous gore. The top half of the structure disintegrated into a cloud of splintered metal. The Zorgons whipped around in confusion as the tower collapsed. Morales' men opened up from both sides, tungsten spikes stitching glowing lines across ebony carapaces. Zorgons crumpled, leaking cobalt blood. Morales sprinted for the electrified fence, his squad close on his heels. He thumbed a switch on his gauntlet, extending a pencil-thin cutting laser from his knuckles. The beam sliced through the chain links like butter, the metal sizzling and sparking. Morales kicked the fence down and charged into the camp, the Iconians scrambling back in fear. "No, wait!" Quasar shouted, pushing his way to the front of the crowd. "These humans are here to rescue us. We must be brave. We must seize this chance at freedom." The Iconians froze, a ripple of indecision passing through them. Then, as one, they surged forward, pouring through the smouldering gaps in the fence. The humans quickly formed a protective ring around the civilians, escorting them to safety. "That's the last of them," Hernandez reported as the final Iconians fled the camp. "We need to—" A guttural roar cut him off. A fresh wave of Zorgons was charging across the park, plasma blades flaring to life. "Switch to auto," Morales barked. The human rifles whined as their cyclic rate tripled, becoming a solid wall of fire. The Zorgons barely made it a dozen steps before the torrent of hypersonic spikes cut them to ribbons, twitching bodies piling atop one another. "Shuttles, come in for pickup," Morales ordered into his comm as the last alien fell. "LZ is secure, load 'em up, and let's get the hell out of here." The matted black ships flashed into view, setting down in the center of the camp. Ramps descended and the Iconian civilians began to board, Quasar helping the wounded. Suddenly a nearby building exploded outward in a hail of rubble. A Zorgon of truly monstrous proportions emerged from the dust, a crackling plasma hammer held in its fists. The beast was half again as tall as the others, its hide cross-crossed with jagged scars. Bellowing in rage, it charged straight at Morales, hammer raised for a devastating blow. "Commander, look out!" Hernandez screamed. But Morales was already moving. His hand dipped to his belt and came up with a disc-like device, which he hurled at the charging alien with a flick of his wrist, the disc attached to the Zorgon's chest with a metallic clang. Instantly, a ring of viciously sharp blades punched out from the disc's edges, burying themselves in the monster's hide. The blades began to spin with an angry whir, chewing through chitin and flesh and bone. The Zorgon commander stumbled to a halt, looking down at the grievous wound in disbelief. It made a wet, choking sound, hammer slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers. Then the giant toppled forward and crashed to the ground, luminous ichor pooling around it. The disc continued to spin, now embedded deep in its chest. Morales pried the gore-slick device free, wiping it off on the Zorgon's carcass, before tossing it to a slack-jawed Quasar. "Molecular kinetic impeller," the human said with a predatory grin. "Judging by that arterial spray, I'd say it works even better than we'd hoped. Feel free to try it for yourself, We can always make more. The last of the battered Iconian civilians clambered aboard the matte black human shuttles under the watchful eyes of Morales' men. As the ramps sealed shut with a hiss of hydraulics, Morales keyed his comm. Shuttles 1 and 2, you are clear for liftoff. Get to low orbit and dock with the Retribution on the double. The shuttle's engines growled to life, maneuvering thrusters flaring as they lifted off from the ravaged park. Accelerating hard, they clawed for altitude, the bone-white sky of Iconia receding behind them. Suddenly, Kowalski's voice crackled over the comm, tight with tension. "Commander, I've got a dozen bogies diving in from the cloud layer. They're coming in hot." Morales whipped his head up to see a swarm of angular black shapes hurtling down towards the shuttles, the red glare of their plasma cannons stitching lines of fire across the sky. The shuttles jinked hard, their hulls shuddering as near misses flash-boiled the air around them. Warning tones blared in the cockpits as the enemy plasma bursts slammed into their shields, the defensive barriers flaring an incandescent blue as they strained to dissipate the ferocious energies. "Shields are holding, but they won't take much more of this," the pilot of Shuttle 1 shouted over the cacophony. Morales made a snap decision. "Hernandez, Kowalski, Lee, break out the plasma launchers." The three soldiers lunged for the heavy weapons rack, snatching the bulky tubes and bracing them against their shoulders. They took position at the still-open cargo doors, eyes narrowed against the rushing wind, and opened fire. Searing bolts of blue-white plasma streaked away from the shuttles, the backwash from the launcher's magnetic coils making the deck plates hum. The bolts slammed home with devastating effect, the targeted Zorgon ships virtually disintegrating as the star-hot plasma devoured their hulls in eye-searing flashes. 3 raiders vanished from the scopes in as many seconds, but the rest pressed their attack with single-minded ferocity, boring in through the defensive fire with their cannons blazing. Abruptly the raiders peeled away, their thrusters flaring as they arced back towards the clouds. Morales frowned. They'd hardly put a dent in the Zorgon squadron. Why would they disengage now, when they had the shuttles at their mercy? The answer came a heartbeat later. "New contact," Kowalski barked, his knuckles white on the grip of his launcher. "Capital-class signature, coming in fast." Morales felt his blood run cold as a monstrous shadow fell across the shuttles. A Zorgon dreadnought burst from hyperspace with terrible purpose, its kilometer-long hull bristling with weapons. The titanium behemoth dwarfed the human mothership hovering ahead of the shuttles, its prow yawning open to reveal the hellish red glow of a plasma torpedo tube the size of a frigate. The Retribution's point defense lasers lashed out, stabbing at the dreadnought's shields in a desperate bid to ward off the inevitable. In response, the Zorgon ship unleashed a full salvo, a dozen torpedoes leaping from its launch cells in a rippling cascade of destruction. The human ship vanished in a maelstrom of detonations, its shields flaring to scintillating life as they fought to turn aside the wall of plasma hurtling towards them. The bridge crew clung to their stations as the deck bucked and heaved, damage alarms howling. "Shields are down to 15%, the tactical officer reported, his voice cracking. "We can't take another hit like that." Morales dragged himself to the navigational console, his mind racing. They couldn't outfight this monstrosity, but maybe, just maybe, they could outmaneuver it. "Helm, I need you to plot a hyperspace jump," he barked. "Keep it in system and set the exit coordinates for—" He rattled off a string of numbers. The helmsman looked at him incredulously, but Morales fixed him with a steely glare. "Do it now!" As the crew scrambled to obey, the dreadnought loomed ever larger in the viewports, its weapons glowing hellishly as they drank in power for another salvo. The Retribution's hyperdrive thrummed to life, space warping and distorting around the ship's hull as the jump field formed. A fresh volley of torpedoes leapt from the dreadnought's launch cells, the incoming plasma warheads burning like small suns as they hurtled towards the stricken human vessel, and passed harmlessly through empty space as the Retribution stretched into infinity and vanished, the hyperspace jump swallowing it whole a bare heartbeat ahead of the deadly salvo. On the Dreadnought's bridge, the Zorgon commander allowed himself a moment of smug satisfaction. The pitiful humans had fled before the might of the Zorgon war machine, just as countless other species had before them. No doubt they would slink back to their homeworld, tails tucked between their legs like the mewling primates they were. "Set course for the system's hyperspace ingress point," the commander ordered contemptuously. "We'll crush them like insects should they dare to return." Halfway across the system, scanners straining for any sign of the human ship, the crew of the Dreadnought had barely a second's warning before all hell broke loose. Alarms screamed like damned souls as a massive gravitational anomaly bloomed directly above the ship's dorsal hull. The commander's head whipped around to the sensor console, eyes going wide as he saw an impossible reading, a ship dropping out of hyperspace within spitting distance of his own vessel. Before the commander could even bellow a warning, the anomaly spat out the human ship in a blaze of Cherenkov radiation. The Retribution, having plotted a suicidally close-range exit vector, plummeted from hyperspace like the fist of an angry god, her ventral hull mere meters away from scraping across the Dreadnought's hull. The human ship's spinal railguns, the barrels glowing red with the heat of charging capacitors, swiveled to point straight down. An instant later, they spoke their fury. Hyper-dense kinetic kill slugs ripped free of the railgun's magnetic embrace at a respectable fraction of light speed, shrieking across the negligible gap between the two ships in microseconds. The results were cataclysmic. The Dreadnought's dorsal hull, never designed to withstand such an extreme close-range assault, virtually vaporized as the armor-piercing projectiles punched through it like tissue paper. Geysers of molten metal erupted from the impact points as the slugs tore ever deeper into the ship, ripping through bulkheads and decks as if they simply didn't exist. The shock waves from the hypersonic impacts raced through the Dreadnought's hull, shattering it like brittle glass. In seconds, the once mighty warship was reduced to a drifting wreck, hemorrhaging atmosphere from 100 gaping rents as it listed drunkenly in space. Morales, knuckles white on his command chair, bellowed for an immediate second jump as the Dreadnought's death throes buffeted the Retribution. The helmsman didn't hesitate, hands flying over his console. With a flash of distorted starlight, the human ship leapt into the safety of hyperspace, leaving the twisted remnants of the Zorgon vessel far behind. With a final shudder, the Retribution dropped out of hyperspace on the outskirts of the Galactic Council system. As the ship approached the massive space station that served as the Council's headquarters, a swarm of warships from a dozen races moved to intercept them, weapons bristling. "Attention, unidentified human vessel," a stern voice crackled over the comm. "You are trespassing in restricted space. Explain yourselves immediately." Morales leaned forward in his command chair, his face set like stone. "This is Commander John Morales of Task Force Retribution. We have liberated the Iconian people from Zorgon occupation and are returning their civilians. We require immediate medical assistance." There was a long, tense pause. Finally, the voice returned, grudging consent in its tone. "Permission to dock granted, but we will be watching you closely, human." As the Retribution slid into its assigned berth, medical teams rushed aboard to tend to the weakened Iconians. Morales grabbed the gore-encrusted helm of the Zorgon commander, then turned to Quasar. "Come on, it's time the Council faced some hard truths." The unlikely pair marched through the station's halls, drawing shocked murmurs and fearful glances. They swept into the Council chamber like a thunderstorm, the babble of voices falling silent as all eyes turned to them. Morales strode to the chamber's center and slammed the Zorgon helm down on the speaker's dais with a resounding clang. "Iconia is free," he declared, his voice ringing with barely contained fury. "The Zorgons are broken. No thanks to any of you." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of outrage. "You had no right," the Andorian ambassador shouted, leaping to his feet. "This is an act of war." "How dare you violate our peace?" the Tellarite roared. Morales held up a hand, the gesture somehow cutting through the din like a blade. "Peace?" he hissed. "You dare speak of peace, while an entire species was enslaved and slaughtered?" He tapped a control on his gauntlet. A hologram sprang to life above the dais, recorded by Morales' helmet cam. The nightmarish images of the Zorgon camps played out in horrific detail. The emaciated Iconians, the cruel alien guards, the piles of dead. Silence fell once more, heavy with numb horror. Morales stared at the ambassadors, his eyes hard as flint. "You knew," he said softly, each word sharp as a dagger. "You knew and you did nothing. You sat here in your comfortable chairs and let the Iconians suffer, let them die." The Vulcan ambassador stood, her face a mask of calm. There were larger considerations at play, the Zorgon Dominion. "Fuck your considerations," Morales snarled, "and fuck your cowardice. An entire people cried out for help and you buried your heads in the sand. You failed them. You failed yourselves." He turned to leave, Quasar trailing numbly behind. The Iconian reached out, his voice trembling. "Commander Morales, I don't know how to thank—" Morales rounded on him, eyes blazing. "Don't, just don't. We didn't do this for you. We didn't do it for them. We did it because it was right, because someone had to, and we were the only ones with the spine to act." He jabbed a finger at Quasar's chest. "You're free, your people are safe. But understand this, we won't always be there to fight your battles for you. It's time for you, for everyone on this council, to decide what you really stand for, if you have the courage of your convictions." Morales turned back to the councillors, his voice low and cold. "We won't be your attack dogs. We won't be your janitors, cleaning up the messes you're too weak-willed to prevent. The Zorgons are broken, but they won't be the last to try this. So decide, here and now. Will you stand up to the next tyrant? Will you act, or will you sit on your hands and wait for us to do it for you again?" He leaned forward, the fire in his eyes searing into each of them. "Choose wisely. The Iconians nearly paid the ultimate price for your cowardice." Turning on his heel, Morales stormed from the chamber, not sparing a single backward glance. Quasar started to follow, but the human pointedly ignored him. The doors hissed shut with cold finality, leaving the ambassadors to stare at each other in uneasy silence. On the main view screen, the human fleet wheeled about and leapt to FTL, vanishing into the void. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.